human perspective.
Welcome to Unbiased and on the Fence. This is Paranormal Frequencies. How are you guys doing tonight? We have our special guest, Marilynn Hughes. Sherry, tell us about our fabulous guest.
Okay, Marilynn Hughes founded the Out of Body Travel Foundation in 2003 with a mission to reduce spiritual and physical hunger worldwide. Marilynn has written 98 plus books, 40 magazines, and around 15 CDs on out of body travel and comparative religious mysticism. These books, along with accompanying music and art, are all available for free download. Marilynn has experienced, researched, and written and taught out of body travel and mysticism since 1987 and has appeared on innumerable radio and television programs to discuss her thousands of out of body experiences. Marilynn, I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, I'm honored to be with both of you. Thank you for inviting me, and it's great to meet you, Sherry.
I have to say, Marilynn became a huge synchronicity for me because I had already had my Michael Jackson experiences, and I already had heard her on Coast to Coast, and I was already a fan of hers. I knew that her books were available for free download on her website, and I was working on a hospice case, and I was like, I'm gonna go check out some of these books. And I get on there and I'm looking through all these titles, and then I was like, oh my gosh, it said Michael Jackson, The Afterlife Experiences, book 1, 2, and 3. And then they have that little trilogy, which is so cool and beautiful. I don't know if they can see it, so I got and all of your books are so beautiful. The front of them.
Thank you.
So if you have to buy them if you get a physical copy, but they are available for free down. But I'm telling you, you're gonna want all of them because they're all so beautiful, and she's had so many experiences that are just profound. They're amazing. But anyway, so I thought, Marilynn, that you could start by maybe telling us, and I know everybody asks you this, but I know that when you were a child, you'd had an out of body experience, and then later on in life, you were kind of shown then that it was going to happen again. Can you tell us about that?
Well, when I was 9, I had an experience, and it was really quite mind-blowing experience where, the heavens opened, and it was, with the, the clouds and the marble staircase and the angels on either side, and up at the top, the thrones, and there was, a Father God figure and a Christ figure. And I was slowly ascending those thrones. And, I tell this story a lot, but, one thing I'd like to just say about it, that, you're never really able to convey. This was an experience that completely changed my life, my reality, as a, think of yourself as 9 years old. And this was world changing, you know what I mean, in terms of my reality. And so it was such a, ironically, I would almost call it like my Moses experience, my Mount Sinai, it was so amazing and beautiful. But I was shown a lot of things. And among them, I was shown some things that were going to happen to me in my childhood, which, then subsequently I was also shown that there was a purpose, and these experiences were going to come back to me later, and they did when I was around 22, and that there was something I needed to do with them. I had a purpose with it. God wanted me to do something. And And so I was filled with, this knowledge of that purpose, but there's an energy that comes with it too, so, it's kind of like having a tree planted in you.
Right.
So I was there from, the time I had that experience. It was like, it's just there and it's growing. So when I was 22, started having experiences again. My husband was the one who suggested I start writing them down. And then I just, started writing. The experiences continued and expanded. I remember thinking, like when I wrote my first book, like that was released in 1991, I remember just my worldview at that time, what I had been shown and what I had seen. And I could never have imagined what God had in store for me to show me in the next 30 years. I could never have imagined. But what I have definitely come to know is, what St. Paul said about what eye has not seen nor ear heard is what God has prepared for in the heart of the man who loves him is a true understatement.
Right.
And so, sometimes it's hard for people to even fathom, and it's hard for me to, go back to the beginning and from where I'm at today and try to, well, okay, this is where you begin.
But you want to say, you know what? Buy the book. No. The book and the next book and the next book. But
well, that is one of the beauties about it is that you can, and you can download them, and they're at the website, which is outerbodytravel.org, and you can follow it in sequence. And most people, that's how they do the best when they're trying to open up to these experiences, because it opens you up very naturally. But I think it's important for people to know that, the idea that most people might have about what is an out-of-body experience, is very minimal in comparison to what it truly can become. You need to look at this as profoundly religiously and spiritually significant. This is the type of experience that will completely change your life if you allow it to. You know what I mean?
That's one thing that I had learned from you was that although there, a lot of people claim like to have the capability in the fourth dimension to, control everything and everything, but that it's best to like, let God take you to where you're supposed to be and show you what you're supposed to see and let you experience what you're supposed to experience. But it's very obvious to me that you were like chosen to do this. It's so neat when I hear you say, that you've had experience with like different prophets, sages, aesthetics, and over the, and everything, because that's what I feel like you are. I know that you're humble, but I mean, for me, it's like you're just right up there with them, and I just hope that that's how I really feel. I really do. You have
That's
so
very
much
kind. I don't feel like I'm worthy of that, but it's very kind of you. But
you have so much to offer. And so I'll say this too, is that it was so neat to me, because when I found that synchronicity with the Michael Jackson books, and when I got them, I'll never forget what you said, because it was exactly how I felt with because when Michael Jackson had like contacted me in the way that he did, is that you had said that when he had approached you while you were out of body,
yeah,
and that he had wanted you to write, and that you were just like, well, I don't do anything unless I get permission from my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So you went to him, and then he said, write the book. And to me, it's just, and what was neat was at the time, like you were saying in the book, that you didn't really know why why this was shown to you. And then by the time I'd heard you on a later interview, you'd said that you understood now. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's clicked so well. So why don't you just tell everybody why?
well, why, the the beautiful thing about Michael Jackson's afterlife experience, and I don't know, Shane seems to see it's funny when we start talking about Michael Jackson, we all start smiling, and part of the reason for that is because there was just something so light and wonderful and happy about his soul and his spirit that those of us who have touched it really feel. And, and it's kind of, it's like when we're talking about him, I know this is going to sound funny, but allow me a little flit of fancy here. It's like I'm thinking of moonwalking because, when Michael Jackson came into my life, it was just fun. It was just so fun, But one of the, there were quite a few reasons, I think, why. And one of the other things about when I had that experience, it wasn't just that I wasn't given permission to write it. I was told, write it. I want you to write this. And and it's interesting because if you look at the rest of my books, it's kind of like doesn't make a lot of sense that it's kind of in there, But it's when you look at Michael Jackson's afterlife adventure and experiences, it really mimics, the afterlife experiences of every common man. And his journey was so beautiful and so sublime and so not different from the rest of us,
Yeah.
He there was just such a blatant humanity about Michael Jackson that I fell in love with. I love that man. There's a blatant humanity, and I think in some respects, one of the things I learned about him as a person, because you, Sherry, and I, we've discussed how neither one of us were big fans of Michael Jackson. We both had other musical people that we were more, that we were more into, and so it's kind of a different thing for us, but it was so interesting to see how this, how this world had kind of
lost something. No, I'm sorry.
Sorry, say that again.
I thought you were going to say lost something when he left. I apologize. Go ahead.
Actually, that's a very good point, because that's true. That's very true. But they not only did people missed something about Michael, but we did lose something when he left. He was a big light, and he carried a lot of light, and he carried a lot of love, and it was legitimate. And there were a lot of people that unjustly went after him, and it was just there was a lot of but this is kind of what we see in the material world, unfortunately. When people exhibit genuine goodness, a lot of times it gets taken for granted, so to speak. But when I went with Michael on his journeys, he went through a lot of the same things that everyone else goes through. He went through the purgatorial realms. I still remember, probably one of the things I remember the most clearly is when he was in the mountains screaming. And that was a really intense experience. And one of the reasons I remember it was because we were somewhere where it was just him and I. No one else could hear it, and he could just get out of his spirit, all of his anger and all of the things, all of the frustration, all that stuff. And it was just such a purifying moment, because no one else could hear it. It could just be his own thing. And then at the same time, he was humble enough to share that with me and wanted me to, share the whole journey. So we did. I think there were a lot of purposes for sharing his afterlife journey.
One thing that I liked was how he, how at first his spirit guides and angel, like kind of act like his entourage, because that's what he was used to having around him.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was something there. And then the part oh, I know what really interested me. I had an experience where I helped him walk, like out of body, like walked him to a park bench or whatever. I didn't realize that he had problems with his legs, and then when I saw that in the book, that became like another confirmation for me, because
Uh-huh.
he had like prosthetic legs for a while,
Yes.
because he was kind of dealing with the fact that he had suffered from so much pain, right?
Yes. He had a lot of pain. I think a lot of people didn't realize how much pain he was in.
I think he had lupus, didn't he?
He did have lupus, and he also had the burn injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the vitiligo thing was something that, a lot of us don't know a lot about, really.
Right.
I think that was a much bigger problem. And, the burns were pretty significant from what I understand that he had.
What's interesting, I had studied a bunch of stuff on him, and did you know what's interesting? If you took the day that he was born and the day that he died, right in the middle, that day is the day that he was burned at the Pepsi, in the Pepsi
Really?
thing. Yeah, and it was almost like his life kind of went up, and then that happened, and then it kind of started. He started having some, problems and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
so I was trying to think. There was a couple other things I wanted to ask you about, though. Didn't you have a near-death experience?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Can you tell us about that a little bit? I may come back to the other stuff, but
Sure.
I was anxious to hear.
Yeah, when in 2003, in 2001, I was diagnosed with cardiomyopathy and heart failure, and I had that's the most common reason people will have transplants, heart transplants, and it was a complication of pregnancy, my third pregnancy, and I actually had heart failure for 17 years, and that's pretty much an incurable condition. And last year it spontaneously healed.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But in 2003, it appeared that the heart was getting, worse. And so I'd done some echocardiograms, and we were getting ready to go in and do some stuff. And they were going to have a chopper standing by because they were thinking maybe transplant. And they were going to be ready to send me off because I was in a small mountain town in Colorado. And so the night before the procedure, I was I had an experience where I probably had an arrhythmia in my sleep of some kind, and so I was shooting through space towards the tunnel, that everyone talks about, and in the tunnel was my little dog that I had for like 24 years. Little Joy dog. She was a little tiny terrier. She was black and white, and she was sitting in the tunnel doing this.
You had that as a child, when you were a child?
Yeah, I had her when I was growing up, and
this seems to be something that I see a lot with people.
Do you?
My dad had that experience. Okay, go ahead.
And so I was, subsequently, I knew I couldn't touch the veil at the, at the end of the tunnel, because if you do, you generally can't return and all that. But Jesus appeared at that point, and then he took my hand and took me on this beautiful journey into all the worlds. It was just so awesome. And that was a grace, because generally you're not supposed to go beyond that point. And he allowed me to go beyond that point. And so I was literally flying through worlds. And so it was like, it's every second you're in a different world, and there's all the beautiful colors, the purples, pinks, blues, and whites and yellows, and the vibrations, the different vibrations, and the different energies that you're feeling is just so beautiful and so wonderful and everything. And then Jesus brings me back to where the tunnel is, and he talks to me about how the purpose of human life is to go from selfishness to selflessness. And then he shows me kind of like it's bigger than this, but you know, since we have a small screen, he had like a thing from the floor, from the ground and up. And it's like a meter of a selfishness meter, you know.
Yeah.
And further, the closer to the bottom you are, is the more selfish you are, and the further you go up, the more selfless you are. And so he showed me where I was on that scale, and then he showed me, you know, where humanity kind of, you know, wavers, which is pretty close to the ground, you know, and then I was allowed to kind of hear I guess one way to put it would be the wailing of humanity in the distance, you know.
Right.
And he tells me, you know, he tells me that it's still my choice. I can go back if I want, but I've done everything I need to do, and I can cross over if I would like to. But it won't make any difference if I go back. Mankind and humankind will remain selfish. And, you know, I'm hearing the people fighting in the background, the screaming and the wailing, and, you know, as I don't know, as idealists, you know, we're all like, oh, we're going to go back, we're going to make it change. But he's letting me know very clearly, you know, you're not going to change it, but you can go. And, you know, and I said to him, well, I said, as long as it's my choice, I have to go back, because I have 3 young children. And my kids were really young then. You know, my kids are all grown now. They're all adults. And my youngest was just a little baby at the time, you know. And so he looks at me, and he's standing in front of me. And, you know, kind of, you know, his arms are out, you know, looking at me. And he says, okay, well, I want you to go back and pray for a heart transplant. And I told him, I said, no, I can't do that. And I said, but I will go back, and I will pray that the life of the perfectly healthy person that would have to die for me to get a new heart be spared, and I'll take my chances with the heart that I've got. And he pauses, and he's looking at me, you know, kind of like I'm looking right at you, really deeply in the eyes. And he's just real serious for a minute, you know. I'm like, you know, and he says, he just, you know, real strong pause, you know, and it's just very quiet. And it's like, I grant that. And all of a sudden, and we're both traveling through this tunnel, heading back. And we stop for a moment, and is kind of like what looks like a bookstore. And we're in this bookstore. He's sitting next to me, like in a chair. And I'm looking at like a shelf of books. And it's at least 30 or 40 books. And I noticed that my name is on all of them. And I'm a little confused, because you have to remember, this is 2003, which is the year that the foundation was founded. And so, you know, I'm looking at this, and he says, I'm going to make good use of you. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, really kind of like overwhelmed. I'm like, you know, I hadn't even written one book at that time. So right. I'm like, sure. Okay, you know what I mean? And then, you know, whoosh, you know, flying again through space and heading back to the body. And then, you know, it's the morning of the procedure. We're heading, you know, we don't have a lot of time to talk about anything. So we head out, and we're going to do the procedure. Don't tell anybody about it. Go into the procedure, wake up from it later. I'm still at the hospital. I haven't been flown anywhere. And I just, you know, asked the doc why. And he says, well, we can't explain it, but for some reason your heart's just doing a whole lot better than it was a week ago. And I didn't say anything, because I knew my doctor was not a believer, and I knew why, but I just kept quiet, and I was like, thank you.
That's awesome.
And yeah, and then, you know, literally the instructions just started coming for how to form everything, you know. And 6 months later, the foundation was up and running, and and it's been like that ever since.
You were even guided on how to work the computer, right?
Yes, I was. And, you know, not just that, but I did music and stuff, so I was given instructions on musical equipment. I was given instructions on how to play certain instruments and everything, because I was all kinds of stuff that I had to learn how to do to get things going. And I remember even in the beginning there was the free download thing. There's a reason why I focus on that, because I had this beautiful experience like 3 months after that near death one, where I was taken to this beautiful, huge space where all the prophets, saints, mystics, sages, and ascetics, and literally hundreds of them, and they were surrounding me, and they told me that it was really important that everything would be available for free download. And this was in 2003, when it was a little harder to do, because you remember dial-up?
Oh, yeah.
And so I had to learn quite a few tricks to get some of those things downloadable. But it was really important because we were working to reduce spiritual hunger worldwide. We wanted everything to be available to feed souls. And the injunction that we came up with came from Mother Teresa, because she said that the spiritual hunger in the West was worse than the physical hunger in the East. And so we came up with the need to reduce spiritual hunger. And and so that's what we've been trying to do. But we also, after the 2004 tsunami, took on physical hunger as well, and we raised money for charitable projects around the world, because you can't really put a lot of energy in your life towards the spiritual development if you're living in poverty or in a disaster zone. So we have to be real about the importance of lifting people up as well, so that they can take those steps as well. So we have to deal with both physical and spiritual poverty,
Absolutely.
It's so beautiful. I know when you were saying that that he showed you your son at that point, that reminds me of the part of the Michael Jackson experiences, whenever he had told you, when he'd said, do you know what the most beautiful thing in the world is? Still that little part, I love that part when he's talking about your son.
Yes. You have to remember, sometimes I don't remember everything exactly, but I know this is the children.
When he had
children,
said,
right?
You remember now or no?
You can go ahead and tell the details, but I know it was the children is the most beautiful.
He had said, do you know what the most beautiful thing in the world is? And you were like, no, what? And then he like allowed you to like see your son and hear his voice, and he was really small at the time or whatever.
Gosh, you're gonna make me emotional because he's all grown up now.
I know, huh?
Well, I remember he was so cute then too. It's funny when they're so little, we don't realize how short that's going to be. You know what I mean? How quickly they're going to grow up. Yeah.
That's like my little boy. He was so brown, and he had these little ringlets, and his hair was long like that. So he was eating a banana one day, and we were like, oh, we're going to dress him up like baby Tarzan for Halloween. So my daughter had a little Pebbles dance outfit, so we just rolled it up where it was like a little skirt thing, gave him a banana, and he took off on the 4-wheeler trick-or-treating. It was so cute. Yeah, they grow so fast.
Yeah, they do.
On those tunnels that you the tunnel that you go through when people experience death or whatever, but I want to ask you this, it seems I've seen, I don't have a lot of experience, but a lot of different tunnels that look different, and they're all kind of blue. Have you seen that or no? That's what I'm asking.
There's lots of different tunnels that you can travel through in the out of body travel state.
But they look like different textures or something.
Yeah, different textures, different colors. And a lot of people in the near death experiences talk about the darker tunnel with the light at the end, and that's the one that a lot of people see in near death experiences. It's also the one that often people see something like that when they're traveling through time, either before or after, going, because you can go forward or backward in time. And then the ones with the ribs and stuff are often ones that are taking you into initiations and mysteries. Yes. And then there's different colored ones like you're talking about that are like the light blue ones are going to be taking into higher, finer spheres, the things like that. There are tunnels that are darker that are going to take you into some of the lower spheres that are, a little more
The
scary.
only time I ever saw one that wasn't gray or textured like corrugated or like just kind of like blotchy, blue, white, staticky. But I saw one time a gray and white one. But that's the only, all the rest of them were like blue or whatever.
So is there always a tunnel that you go through? Or?
No.
Not always, it's different for everybody and different every time, it can vary quite a bit.
I'm just asking her random stuff. I want to know. I'm so sorry. You can interrupt.
No, that's okay.
No, you're asking great questions. I think this is cool because I was sitting there wondering about the whole tunnel of light, and so I guess you can actually start to recognize certain tunnels are going to lead a certain type of a place then.
Yeah, and one of the things I mentioned in the Mysteries of the Redemption is for people when they're out and they're trying to figure out where to go is to actually call out the corridor. Because then one of the corridors will appear that actually will give you some direction as to where to go. And so that's always cool.
And if you let it be guided by God, you're going to, learn more.
Right. And that's, there you go. Thank you so much, Shane. That's the Mysteries of the Redemption. That's one of the two books I always recommend as the first to read, along with Come to Wisdom's Door. And we have a series of 9 books that are how-to, which starts with Come to Wisdom's Door, and they go up in heavy frequency and vibration as you, and also the goes through. You go through that, and then there's a bunch of books that go after it, and so you can just keep going in sequence. There's a lot of stuff that goes with that.
But that's really awesome because if people want to actually get a hard copy of the book, they can buy it. But if they want to just download it for free, they're able to do that from the website, right?
Yes.
Right. And a lot of people really like the Audible. And so everything's available on Audible. A lot of people like audio these days. Yeah. Audible, and of course, any digital form as well. They're all available in those forms as well. And so
one personal question that I had about that book is I bought that book and another copy of it. It's the same book with a different cover. The other cover I actually had a experience with. I had made a video for you and I didn't know how to make a thumbnail on it. And all of a sudden, I had got it in the mail that day after I had went to the cemetery to meditate for the children. I come back and it came in the mail, and that was when it had the return address. I don't know if that's the shipping company or whatever. It said Moon Escape, which was so Michael Jackson-y, and then the address was like 222. But anyway, so I make this little video and to put it on my little YouTube channel, and I didn't know how to make a thumbnail, and it made it just of the cover where Jesus was on it, like holding the world in his hands.
Yeah.
So did it get changed, or there was 2 different covers?
There's actually, I think 3 or actually 4 now that I think about it. I think there's 4 different covers.
Is this the latest?
That one would be the latest. Yes, that's the latest. Yeah, it's gone through several reincarnations.
I'm gonna have to start collecting all those, huh? So
yeah, they get
4 of them.
Wow. And they go through their different redesigning whenever, you know what I mean?
Well, I thought of another good question is, this is something I'm just going to ask and see if you know what it is. Several years ago, I started experiencing this thing where I see these blue sparks or flashes of light, and I see them around people all the time. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I've seen it like 3 times since we've been talking. I was wondering if you know what that is and what would be your interpretation of that from your experience.
Well, blue sparks or flashes of light can be, just about anything, but, it can be an indication that there's a spiritual presence. But, in order to discern further, you'd have to touch into what it is to know what it might be.
I know I've always had like a positive, I feel like that's one gift that I don't know how I got it, but I feel like I have that because I've, had different experiences that show me that I've been able to know when something's not good. You know what I mean? And they're really positive, and I've almost come to the conclusion that they are angelic of some. That's what I've thought from what I've gathered. But I mean, I'm not positive. It's just from my own.
It's very possible. Usually when it's like a bright blue and stuff like that, you're looking more likely. But I always recommend everyone go through the process of discernment with spirits. A lot about that in my books and stuff. So that it's real important that we do that, because there is the possibility of deception with everything.
Right. Well, see, that's what happened when I was going through all that stuff with Michael Jackson. I was everything felt right, but every once in a while I'd just be like, this, cannot. And then I'd have so many signs, given to me that it was a legitimate thing. And then when I found out the little mission that he wanted me to do, I was sure then that it was, something positive that he was leading me, guiding me to do. And there was a reason for it,
Yeah.
Well, and also one thing a lot of people point out that one of the first things he said was, you need to remember who you are. So, I mean, that's not a bad message to give somebody, it's basically
One of the things that people don't remember, and I think this is what I felt when you first shared with me what Michael Jackson was doing with you, and I've heard it with other people as well. All of us, when we cross over, first of all, we all have purification to go through. And Michael went through a lot of purification, purgation, purgatorial type things. But what I also saw and heard from a lot of people, and your story is very similar, is where he was actually shedding his program, which what that means is he's actually dispersing some of his energy onto other people. So he's giving aspects of the remaining destiny that needed to be dispersed onto other people. So he handed part of that to you, and he handed other parts of it to many other people that I had also heard from, some of them.
That explains a lot, huh?
Yes, and to be fair too, because I heard from people that definitely did experience some deception and went through some weird stuff, and so there were people who did go through things regarding the Michael Jackson thing that I think is pretty certainly not related to Michael Jackson, but they were trickster spirits. And you have to remember that even in the spirit world, you can have spirits who are going to imitate or pretend that they're Michael Jackson. And, I mean, just like people would do that on the ground, that can happen with trickster spirits. And there were people that were messed with by spirits that did things like that. So there were people, and so you're going to run into people who've had bad experiences too,
Right. That makes total sense to me.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why the legitimate stuff, I don't know if it's a trend or whatever, but a lot of times they're not a fan, so I guess they're really not as open to manipulation if it's like not, say Michael Jackson wasn't your fan to begin with, that wouldn't be a really effective way to try to go and deceive somebody as someone that, they weren't their pop star hero or something. I don't know if does it seem like the people that had the more negative experiences were fans of his?
I do think that there was some of that. I don't remember, because it was quite a long time ago. I don't remember all of the people, so I can't say for sure, but I do think it was more like that with some of those cases. I do remember one case in particular. I don't, I'm not going to mention names or anything, but there was one case in particular where I actually did go in and I actually found the culprit in a particular case.
Ooh. Wow.
It was a who had overseas But this was just a particularly disturbed soldier who had died overseas at that time. And he was lost. He became a lost soul. And it was around the time of Michael Jackson's passing. And he had gotten into this thing of deceiving women for sexual, basically, you know, getting into being like a succubus.
Interesting. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I actually went in and found out about this spirit, and was able to help this soul pass on. And that's, you know, that's kind of an unusual scenario. And that's important to know. But yeah, people can do that. Things like that can happen.
You do a lot of like soul retrieval and helping people to cross over and stuff. But you know what I was just thinking about that would be great for you to tell the audience about? I listened to an interview of you on Skeptico where they were trying to basically, you know, basically like test you in a way, you know, or like have you prove your abilities. And what they did was they just picked someone that maybe had a problem dealing with a deceased relative, and that's kind of all they told you, and they maybe gave you an object of theirs, right?
Yeah.
And then you went in and found, can you tell us about that? That's so beautiful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and you can listen to the whole thing on at the website at outofbodytravel.org. It's called the Out of Body Experiment. This one was done about 10 years ago as well, and it was Alex Securis put this together. And yeah, it was you know, it was interesting at the time because we just agreed that we would just go for it. We both kind of agreed to it, and he said he had trouble finding people who would agree to those terms of, you know, we're just gonna no information basically. And just so yeah, and so, you know, I was given an object of the person. I wasn't given a name or any information as to age or anything about what might have happened or anything. And then my job was to find out why they might need help. And so I was taken into this situation, and apparently this information that I was given was pretty right on with what had happened. It was a pretty tragic case, pretty tragic, and a lot of really cool synchronicities with the family, and apparently it really gave them a lot of peace. And we were able to also talk after we did the whole experiment, and you know, I think it helped them to move on as well.
I know the girl that had died or whatever had showed a flower, and the mother had, when you told her about that, she had actually planted a garden of those flowers without knowing what kind to really do, but to do a garden for her daughter.
Yeah, the peonies, yes. And yeah, it was a very complicated story in terms of how what had happened to their daughter. And she was a young woman, you know, early 20s, I believe, if I recall correctly. And she had gotten into a very convoluted situation, and it had resulted in her death.
And I just really wanted to mention it because I thought that it was something that was, you know, kind of proves your abilities. And I thought maybe the listeners, if they wanted to check out that interview, you know, that they could, because I love the whole story and everything, and I just thought we could bring it up just because it really proves what, you know, your abilities.
Yeah. And it was skeptico.com, and it's the Out of Body Experiment. And yeah, it's on the website under appearances at outofbodytravel.org. And yeah, you know, also I did do a lot of work with lost souls, and you know, in the Mystic Knowledge series, there's a whole book on ghosts and lost souls that you can download that goes through just case after case after case of, you know, situations with ghosts and lost souls, so you can understand more and more the difference between them. You're also going to learn that if you read the Mysteries of Redemption and go through those books as well. So whichever way works for you, but the Mystic Knowledge series is a group of about 14 books that kind of teaches things according to subject matter. So like there's one on reincarnation and karma. There's one on spiritual warfare, angels and demons, and death, dying in the afterlife. So you go in there and you can see the different subjects, and there's books that just cover those in particular, and that's helpful for a lot of people who are more interested in something in particular. You know what I mean?
Yes, it's such great information, though. Everybody needs to read them all. Thank you, Jane.
Yeah, so I guess, as people are discovering more and more, like I've been noticing more telepathic things happening, synchronistic things, and, just paying more attention. And as people's gifts begin to come online more, what advice do you have for people not to operate from fear, or to use their discernment, so that, because a lot of times we're programmed to fear things that we don't understand, right? So what would you advise people to, proceeding forward to, to handle new abilities that might be coming online?
I think ironically, it's funny because my advice changes as I get older. So I think I'll give you some multi-layered advice. First of all, discernment is key, and that's really important. And if you read through my books, you're going to learn a lot about how to apply discernment in those situations. There's a lot about how you do that. But one of the things that I've learned is, as you're getting older, and also more as science is just waking up to these realities of the spirit and of the potential of the human mind, I would, not anymore. This is just human. Pointers or 20 might not be super.
You want to have her
the United States government themselves, through the remote viewing program, through the remote viewing program, they determined that the psychic ability, the ability to determine psychic things, or to remotely go to other places, that psychic gift, the subconscious, the different ways that's just innate in the human being. So what we're finding, we find this with the quantum hologram theories, with the parallel realities, with all of quantum science, all the things that are happening with, the funny thing is that all these things that are coming in through science is ironically what mystics have been saying for 5,000 years. There's nothing to be afraid of. It's literally a natural thing that we are starting to unfold now. And it's going to be such a beautiful thing, because it brings so much potential into the human condition. We're going to be bringing the potential to create a completely different type of human experience by allowing ourselves to open to these gifts. The human experience is here for the purpose of, the purification of the soul, and the more that we open up to the gifts, the spiritual gifts, and the more that, I had this one beautiful vision not too long ago, and it was shown to me as a circle, existence as a circle. And, worldly existence was the bottom half, and the spiritual world was the top half. And, most humans are aware of this bottom half. But when that full circle, when we are operating in both worlds, that's when life begins, that's when life begins. And that's when human potential can reach its pinnacle. That's when spiritual potential can reach its peak. That's when people and souls are going to start accelerating in their evolution towards God, towards light, towards purification. We're gonna speed up. this is a really good thing.
So you think there would be an actual like event or maybe a splitting of these like the world into like maybe a lower frequency one and a higher frequency one?
I've had experiences about that, and it's written about in the Mysteries of the Redemption. I do think that's a possibility. I don't know if we'll be aware of it in terms of which one we're on, because it'll be a shift change. A lot of people have trouble with this idea of parallelity, but in reality, it's where are your eyes pointed? So, right now my eyes are pointed right here. That doesn't mean that I don't have other sets of eyes that are pointed in a million different directions. And that, if I alter my point of perception or my human potential, that this could just suddenly go boop, and my point of consciousness is looking from over here, or over here somewhere, and so we have this ability to be multiplicitous in many worlds, in many times. And for some, it's a hard concept for us as human beings to relate to, but it's not as hard to understand as we make it. But yes, I absolutely believe there can be a shift. And what we have to remember is that those kinds of shifts are actually going on all the time. If it's not going on a mass scale, it's going on individual scales. Every decision that we make to go upwards and every decision that we make to go downwards, shifts are occurring. We are choosing how we are seeing things. I've had many mystical experiences where this is a good forum for this, because I try to explain this on a lot of interviews where there's no video. I'm going to try to do this, but
awesome.
It's a stupid little thing, but think about this. I'll have many, many mystical experiences where I'm just looking straight ahead, and Paramahamsa Yogananda does this a lot. So those of you who are fans of him, pay attention to him, because he'll do this. He'll come in the room and he'll just walk over and he'll just put his fingers under your chin and he'll go, "Stop looking down there." It's change what you're looking at. And then, think about this, because a lot of us are not just looking like this. A lot of us are looking like this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And what he's telling me, he's saying, look up at the heavens, look up at God. Don't look at the material world. If you're looking down, well, don't look down. Look up. And I know that inherently when he does it, it's such a simple thing. It probably seems kind of like a dumb thing to do, but it's actually very purposeful, because he's reminding us we choose where we're looking. So we have to remember, if we're just like this all the time during the day, well, do this.
Mm-hmm.
We have to change our frame of reference. And, I always I'm very required. It's
Think you lost her?
And
maybe we should try to get her call back.
Spiritual with the prophets saying, well, it is a grace. What?
You were cutting out a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's not your fault.
I was just saying it can be that simple, where we make these simple choices and we don't have to make it so complicated. And for the last 40,000 years of existence, it really has been that simple, and we forget that we can bring that simplicity back to it. Part of it, in the modern world, The more complicated things are, people think that's better. I joke around about how companies do upgrades that are really downgrades because they make things harder.
Yeah.
You know, this kind of applies to what I'm talking about. When you're talking about the spiritual life, it doesn't have to be harder to actually be more effective. What you're looking for is what is actually going to do this for you. And, you know, when you think about what a simple act that is, and this is, you know, Paramahamsa Yogananda is the one who does this to me. And he just comes in the room. He's not saying a bunch. He's not saying, you know, I want you to get this out and I want you to do this and I want you to do that and I want you to try this technique. He comes in and he does this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm repeating it just because we
So
miss the profundity of the simplicity sometimes.
Yeah, I was just talking about that today, about simplicity. Let me ask you this. Do you think that it's possible, like retro causality, like could you go back in time and help a soul?
Oh yeah, and I do that. And I if you read the Mysteries of Redemption, you're going to see that.
I have read some of it, by the way.
Yeah.
I just I read like the Michael Jackson ones, and then I started reading that one, and then I had something come up, and we jumped to another one because something came up. No.
Story of my life.
But yeah, but it was still your book I was looking at. It was just a different one. But go so yeah, so you think that you can help a soul from something that they went through, and you know, when they died or something, and you can go back and help them?
Yes, I've seen that happen. But again, that kind of thing, in my cases, it's usually something that God brings about rather than myself.
Right.
You know, so I allow God to guide something like that rather than myself.
Yeah.
Because only He knows whether it'll be what's helpful and what's not, rather than me, because I don't know, you know.
So, okay, one thing that I did want to ask you was this, like, with these kind of abilities, is it possible for are there some people that could use them negatively? And if so, like, what is the best way to protect yourself from that?
Absolutely, that can happen. I've seen that happen to the point of where people have been possessed. That can absolutely happen. That's a big question, because there's a lot of things we have to do to protect ourselves. Prayer is a big part of it. We have to do a lot of spiritual warfare prayer. We have to be doing the things to educate ourselves to know what we are dealing with. In my case, and I believe that this is an important guideline, is that if you are to be trained in doing something mystically, you'll be mystically trained and God will lead you into it. And really, if you're not, you're taking a lot of risks trying to go there without God leading it, because of that possibility. You have to be so careful with, you know, deception is especially in today's world. There's so much deception on the ground, and I really, especially for like young people, they are so easily led astray because of the fact that they haven't had as much time to form their conscience, to form enough knowledge to really discern when someone is telling them the truth but mixing some lies within it, or when a spirit is doing that. One of the things that you definitely don't want to be doing, you don't want to be talking to just random spirits, and a lot of people do that, not realizing that random spirits aren't going to teach you anything. You know, you want to be seeking out God and God's dominion, which includes His prophets, saints, mystics, and sages, and His angels. Angels don't respond to things like Ouija boards or,
Right.
or incantations or spells or, things like that. Angels respond to prayer, and they respond to God's command to respond to prayer. We don't command angels. We pray to God, and God commands his angels. A lot of people get mixed up when they don't realize, when people die, they don't automatically become enlightened. When people die, whatever their level of spiritual elevation at that time is what they die with, and they're not going to have anything to tell you that that is of any help or edification to you. You need to be so this spiritual discernment process, which I try to teach, the Mysteries of the Redemption and these other books, and also Come to Wisdom's Door and the other series of books, is really, really, really important. It's really hugely important, because I can tell you, I hear from people, not people who through my site or anything have experienced this, but people who have dabbled in all sorts of things, and then I hear from them, and they're going through exorcisms, and they're possessed, and I've seen it happen to people who, if you're naturally gifted, and you don't cultivate those gifts in a proper discerning way towards God, it can be totally turned against you. It can be totally turned against God, because your gifts can be used for good or evil. And so if you have natural gifts, you better be careful about handing them over to the Dark One, because I've seen people do it. And
it all kind of comes back to what you were saying about service to self, or service, or I guess selflessness.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. True. There are a lot of ways that you can gauge, but what happens to people when they start falling away, and this is why it becomes so difficult. When a soul is really engaging in the processes of discernment, they're going to be like, gosh, I can see this. I'm not on the right path. But when a soul starts going in the wrong direction, they're going to start being contaminated and infected, and they're going to become, disobedient souls. They're going to become rebellious, and they're not going to see it. And so a lot of times you can't stop it once it gets started, and they're the only ones who can. They have to recognize it. But once they start dabbling, because they're getting contaminated with things and they're not aware of it, and they somewhere along the way they became prideful, they became stupid,
Yeah.
Vain.
Well, it's really like that with just about anything, isn't it? It's like you're given these warnings or signs early on, and then if you ignore them, then you don't get them anymore, and it becomes harder because you've ignored the warning signs right off the bat. Hey, you're misusing this gift or whatever, and since you ignore that, you kind of continue down this negative path and begin to use it for more maybe selfish reasons.
Well, yes, and that's where you end up with, you end up with, I usually don't like to mention names or anything, but people like an Aleister Crowley,
right.
Where people get so lost that there's no lines left for them, and they almost leave no way back for themselves. We never say never, because God is an infinitely loving and merciful God, and very mysterious, and he creates ways back for souls, and I've seen it millions of times. But I use that as an example because that is the end point where a lot of people who get lost in these sorts of things. I can tell you in the Mysteries of the Redemption, I write a lot about the real serious nature of people who play around with witchcraft, whether it's white, black, or in between, any kind of magic, very, very serious. I've been taken to these really, really horrible realms. You don't want to be messing around with that stuff. There is no gray area. It's just not okay.
And you open yourself up to even more of that when you dabble in it, right?
You know, a lot of people, they say, oh, it's white witchcraft. I'm just doing this for healing, or I'm doing this for, you know, and there are a lot of people who truly probably, you know, because a lot of people will go down, and this is where it gets scary, because people do, out of ignorance, go down some of these paths, and they may very seriously and sincerely not intend where they might end up. But what they are doing is they are calling on spirits of a lower nature, and they don't know what they're calling on. And that is not a place you should go for any reason ever.
Like snowball out of control.
No. You know, it's interesting too, because when you look at the cases that they've had in the annals of possession, you know, like the one that was the story that inspired The Exorcist, it was a simple case of that, where there was an aunt in the home who was involved with Ouija boards and stuff like this, and she died, and she was just a dark spirit, and her comrades possessed the soul of that young boy. And that was a total nightmare. What happened to that child was untenable. It was unbelievable, you know, and it was something you could not imagine could come from something like that, you know. And this was a situation where literally her sister took her in her final year or whatever of life, because she needed someone to take care of her. She was trying to do good, and great evil befell them. So you have to look. There's a lot of study and stuff that you can look into, even in if you're interested in this sort of thing. Any of your listeners, look into the cases of the exorcism cases, because you're going to find that there's no gray area. But, you know, what I can tell you that I have experienced in the out-of-body experiences I've had, there's no gray area. I mean, you're dealing with what I was shown. There's no such thing as white witchcraft. You are calling on something that you shouldn't be calling on. Whatever your intention might be, you're still calling on something you shouldn't be calling on. And what you got to be doing is turning your attention towards something very, very different, which is, if you're really interested in spiritual advancement, you want to turn your attention to the all-holy God. And what do you do if you want to move towards the all-holy God? You've got to start getting to know his friends. And that's the prophets, saints, mystics, sages, and ascetics from throughout time. And we know about them. We know about their lives. We know their testimony, and we know their keys to the mysteries of the all holiness of God in the ancient sacred texts. You know, and we have these beautiful things that have been left behind. I've had many, many beautiful mystical experiences about how the ancient sacred texts create this stairway. There's like books stacked up like steps from earth to heaven. Mm-hmm. And the reason that is so is because they provide, each of them provide a different window, a different direction into understanding who God is. And so, you know, whether it's a Catholic saint or a saint from another religion, we are understanding all these facets of who God is. Because if we want to approach an all-holy God, we have to become holier. And so we can't be dabbling in things that are pulling us down, not up. And
You
It's
actually
just a
have books on all of those sacred texts too, and also how most of the religions were on out of body experience based were formed because of a prophet that had out of body experiences, right?
Exactly. Yes, because Revelation was formed from out of body travel. There's a book in particular on that subject called Near Death and Out of Body Experiences of the Prophets, Saints, Mystics, and Sages in world religions that kind of lays it out for you. But there's a whole bunch of them. There's a whole series of books in world, out of body travel in world religions. But it's
So neat.
it's just so important that we understand that what we want to do is this, look up. and so we can simplify it. We don't want to do things that are pulling us down. We want to look up. And even that in and of itself provides us with a simple way of beginning to discern the things that we're bringing into our spiritual reality. And we just remember we are approaching an all holy God. That in and of itself denotes a whole lot of things about what we should be doing and what we should not. And that really helps us to clear the path, the narrow path, the wicket gate. As John Bunyan talked about in the Pilgrim's Progress, let us travel the path of the wicket gate.
But it really is. It's like getting yourself in alignment with the will of God, as like Jesus spoke of. Not my will, but your will be done. And when you're operating from the heart, your will does align with the will of the Father, if you will, to use that terminology. And operating from the heart, you can really see how it's really an inexhaustible source. So you really don't need to go anywhere else.
Exactly. And that is so true. And what people will find is that all of the trappings of these things that they might find down here have nothing in comparison to what they will find when they do this.
Right.
There's no comparison. And they won't, you'll understand that you don't need these. These are distractions that keep us away from looking into the eyes of God rather than, so we just fall away into these other things, and we waste more time,
It's all distractions, yeah.
And although I know that seems like such a beautiful place to end everything, and I know time's like running short, but I just had to ask you if you could tell us, because I know our audience will be really interested in this. Can you tell us a little bit of what you've discovered about aliens in your out-of-body travels?
Sure.
I'll leave that as the last question, just saying. So
well, I've learned a lot about the extraterrestrials. There's a lot of different races, and some of them are good, some of them are not so good. The aliens are a lot like, there are some that are a lot like us, that are mortal beings, so they're a little mix of good and evil. There are some that are a little bit more of a maybe a little lower than us, and then there's others that are higher. And there's some of these extraterrestrials are more interdimensional and or higher vibrational beings, and those are the ones that I'm the most interested in. And and this planet higher has been a lot of difficulty with that. In the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot of obstruction of that just because of the planetary vibration and humanity, that kind of thing. The Pleiadians are one of the races that has tried really hard and is working real hard on that. There's another race that I've seen a lot of, and they're I kind of call them the Tibetans, but I don't know. It's only because I see them work with the Tibetans. They're not Tibetans, but I call them Tibetans. But they work a lot with Tibetans, partly because for some reason the Tibetans are more open to them than a lot of other people on the planet. And these are really, really, really highly advanced beings that it's just really hard to describe them. They can only work with like 5 to 10 people on this planet, because it's just so hard to find people that are finely tuned enough, to be able to work with. There's another species. And species is probably not the best word for them, but that is even beyond them. They are, gosh, that's the place I'd love to go, That's a place I'd love to live, but I've had experience where they let me translate through them and see what it would be like to be in their world. And in their world, it's just so high, fine, light frequency. It's so beyond us that it's almost impossible to put into words. They really are they work in light. They're just so far beyond us. That's a beautiful, beautiful place. There's another planet that I've recently been traveling that I love. I just love. I love it so much. And I want to go there again. But it's a place, it has 2 suns and 4 moons. And it's actually this planet. It's such a light. It's not like these high vibrational places, but it's like this land of the masters.
Does it have crystal stuff there or no?
There's crystal stuff there, but this is a place like where Avalokiteshvara, and a lot of the sages and the mystics and a lot of the Asian masters live there. And it's and I've been taken there. I have a little log cabin at the top of this hill that I get to go to once in a while and meditate. And it's a very, very it's just a beautiful, free feeling, playful, and it's just you just feel so free there. It's just and it's just like the masters are just all around, and you're just like, hey, and you can all talk to each other about different things. What do you think about this problem? What do you think? How should I handle that one? And it's just so beautiful because you're seeing, I have to say, Avalokiteshvara holds my attention because she's gorgeous, she's beautiful, she's a beautiful spirit, But there's these other Asian masters, many of whom I don't even know who they are, and you're just kind of watching them flit around, And then there's these other like prophets and these like I would imagine that they might be like Sufi mystics who are meditating underneath the trees, And then there's others like who might have been like some of the Egyptian cave dweller, early fathers of the desert, Wow. And you're just literally like in a state of panoramic bliss, So I guess that's not, it's not a planet of extraterrestrials. It's a planet of the masters,
Wow.
But it's a place that I've recently discovered that I am just in such bliss about.
Can you go there too much, I guess is the question. Are they like, hey, you've shown up 3 times this week already. Let's tone it down a little bit.
It's definitely not something that I get to do just because I want to, because if I did, I'd be there all the time. But I'm allowed to go there when they so deem, and it's interesting too, because there's like the old ones, the 12 chiefs, the Native American masters too, so like some of the holy Native chiefs are there. I mean, you walk, it's just so amazing because you feel the holiness of these masters, and you're just like nobody's walking. You're all floating around, and you're like, hey, and you're sharing energy of ideas, because
Wow.
it's kind of like we're all congregating about the work that we're being asked to do in various planets and various regions, and
Wow.
it's just so beautiful.
Marilyn, that's what I'm saying. I really feel like you're probably going there because that's what you're part of. That's your people.
Well, that's very sweet, and I hope you're right, because I love it there. And I'm like, I love that little log cabin there, and and I joke around with my husband. I'm like, I'm becoming very, very comfortable with the 2 suns and the 4 moons. And, I kind of like that. That's neat. But it's just such a neat place. And I think that what I'm experiencing and what I have experienced is that we're going to find that in terms of extraterrestrial life, there's an infinite number of worlds there too. We're probably going to be finding, I've experienced like the Alpha Centauri people who are very, very psychic people. They're very, very heart-centered. They're able to sense with love is what they're able to do. So it's like a psychic through love is the way that they are. We're going to be having more and more contact with the ones that are closer to Earth. But there will come a time, when we're going to find out, that throughout the universe, there are probably so many forms of life, just like we find, because when we cross over, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. You'll have to tell me if I already did. But, like when we cross over and we enter into heaven, there are extraterrestrials in heaven, but it's so normal there that we're like, hey, and then when you come back, you're like, wait a minute, those were extraterrestrials in heaven, and so it's so natural and normal when you're out of body that you don't even notice it. And then you come back to our little limited world and you're like, wait a minute,
Yeah, that's kind of like the little thing that kind of like if you're you're leaving your children and your family, but then when you're there, like after death or whatever, you still love them or whatever, but it's like it's okay,
Yes. And
maybe
I think that as we cross over, I think that we are gradually opened up to the multiplicity of worlds again. Because, one of the things I wrote about in the Mysteries of the Redemption 2 was, that after death, we go through the, the life review.
Okay, go ahead.
We go through that life review pertaining to this life. But then for a lot of us, then there will be a subsequent life review beyond that where we're going to meet souls from other lifetimes. We're going to have a reunion with souls that are important to us that relate to other lifetimes.
Right.
And that's further down the experience, but it's very important and it happens. And we will remember them very spontaneously, but it's not someone we remember from this life. It's just like, oh, wait a minute, I know you.
Right. Oh yeah, that whole other life I forgot about.
Well, a whole bunch of other lives, really.
Yeah.
It's a whole bunch of them. And this is, I think a lot of people ask me these questions because the multiplicity is something we have trouble because we are focused right here, but really we are multiplicitous existences. And it's interesting too, because I'm actually seeing that in even like in arts and entertainment and some of the things that people are writing and some of the things that people are actually putting on film, they are covering some of these things. And so I'm seeing that, God is bringing it in and people are finding ways to demonstrate how parallelity works and doing it in ways that are going to be visually helpful to us as human beings in terms of understanding it better. And so, God works in mysterious ways,
Yeah.
So, we do have I had a vision years ago about the coming of the extraterrestrials, and I was shown there would be many races, and there would be higher races, there would be races that were similar to us, and there would be races that were not so good. And so we had to be aware of the fact that there would be all of those, and we would have to, just like people, and just like other species that we see on our own planet, we're going to see different types of species. We're going to see different types of life that will probably be quite surprising to us in terms of what we're used to seeing, what we're comfortable with. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. I'm certainly excited about it.
I know, I am too.
But even just a few short years ago, I would have been frightened to imagine meeting anybody that looked anything much different than what we look like, just because it seems like a freaky thought. But, as long as they're not after me,
I think that what's interesting about that, though, is that we are very comfortable with thousands of different species on our own planet, and so it's not that far a leap, to just consider the possibility of other species on a different planet that might be intelligent. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you look at the creativity of God just on our planet alone, it's not that far a leap for us,
There's some pretty alien looking stuff here on Earth, that you get deep enough in the water or deep enough in a cave somewhere and it starts not to look very earthly anymore.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Such a wealth of information, and much of it's available for free on your website. I do have that under the screen there, outofbodytravel.org.
Yeah.
And I also have your YouTube channel linked as well, so people can go subscribe to your channel.
And have to go check out some of her books, and she has all kind of classes and all kind of stuff, just all kind of things that she's gifted the world.
Oh, thank you, Sherry.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. I'm sure everybody loved having you here and us introducing you to them. And thank you, Sherry, it's been a long time coming, huh?
It's been a long time.
Yeah, this is great. I really enjoyed talking to you guys, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, we love you, Marilynn. Hopefully you can come back sometime. That'd be awesome.
Oh, I'd love to.
We'll start taking these subjects down one at a time, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, we could go on and on forever.
Yep.
We'll never run out of stuff. Well, lots of love and light to all of you guys watching now and later. And thank you again, Marilynn and Sherry. We'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.
Thank you.
If you'd like to support the work I do, go to paypal.me/UOTF. Thanks.